Hello, we're taking a look today at Chaotic Flux number 1, right there. And if you if you haven't seen anything on my channel before, what you should know, and if you have seen something before you may pick up on this, is that I generally look at things I like, things that I'm willing to promote or suggest or recommend. Take your pick. Anyway, here's the title page for us. We got some credits down here, as you would expect. Aliens vs. Monsters, Part 1 of 2. And that is going to be issue 1. And this issue starts, it's a large scene here. This is essentially, they're coming, whoever they are, this group here. We've got Zithara, we find the names through here. Reading, Zithara is there, that's our little blue woman. And then her colleague here, who I believe is supervisory, his name is Soren. He is able to wear this suit, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, that's him in his suit. He's suiting up right there. The scene here is that they are landing for a battle against whatever evil horde that is, and it's essentially the final battle. They mention that this is their final battle against a genocide. Now, I hope I'm not mistaken in interpreting this, but Zithara here is either human and weird, or I believe she's half alien, half human, but the alien part wasn't specified. Anyway, this is our opening scene. We're just supposedly dropped right in on this is the final battle for their lives, or nearly so. Things are coming down to a critical point, and we get some narration that brings us immediately back to a flashback. And this flashback is starting to look at Zithra's life. So this is her first encounter with whatever these giant, horrendous creatures are. Oh, and this piece of art, by the way, is also used for the back cover. I like it. Looks nice. Moving on. Throughout her dealings with discovering this, she has somebody helping her. I think it calls it the professor? Yeah, Professor Lee. And helping her by radio. Professor Lee is apparently exhausted and fighting a cold or something, but that's not necessary to the, or sorry, not something we need to dive into too deeply here. This interaction while she's fighting these monsters reminds her of her childhood. And so we have, from a flashback that's a few months prior to the initial opening of the book, we jump back another 6 years to when she's, I guess, would be age 12. And so what we see here, this story really is a coming-of-age story for a young girl. It's kind of, let's say, allegorical in my view. I'm interpreting this. I don't know if the author intended it, but the changes she goes through in discovering that she has powers and handling them is a bit allegorical to going through puberty. So here she meets tragedy, and a lot of this has to do with loss of innocence. So she sees tragedy with her good friend who also has powers. He is telekinetically able to tear monsters or other enemies apart. There's an apparent genocide going on that these are not monsters here, but these are some group in armor that want to kill little blue people. So she sees tragedy early here in her life, and then one of her overseers comes and takes her away, consoles her. The facility they're in is under attack, and another overseer, who I believe outranks the doctor here, he is surprised to find out that his little Zithara had gained powers, and that he had never been told such, but the doctor here justifies it and says, oh, well, we were taking care of it, we were keeping it suppressed, blah, blah, blah. There are some interesting sci-fi details to go into. I'll let you read those on your own. Zithara is able to make to fabricate from her own body these little crystals, which is kind of cool. And they talk about that a bit. They talk about how her friend died. And there is a reference here. This is yet another tiny flashback in the middle of one flashback to another, where she sort of accidentally discovers she has powers, and of course she accidentally injures another child. I don't know that that's the same child as before. I read this book months ago, and I only just kind of flipped through it now to get familiar again and remember what I wanted to say about it. I knew I wanted to review it, but anyway. So Zithara, this is sort of her beginning of loss of innocence, is her powers developing, and then, so she's, by allegory, now I'm putting this allegory in there because I kind of realized it was, she's becoming a woman. I do want to be careful that J.R.R. Tolkien, in his biography written by Carpenter, you can find him talking about allegory versus application. And I don't know if application is the best word, especially around Christians, because there's interpretation and then application if you're doing Bible study. This is not the Bible, obviously, but some Christians really tend to mix up interpretation and application. It's really bad. But what Tolkien had said about literature in general, not the Bible, was that allegory is deliberately in the pen of the author, whereas application is in the mind of the reader, and the two aren't always the same. That is, the reader could pick up on an idea or a pattern, or just apply and say, oh, this thing is kind of like this other thing I know, and the author might never know that connection existed. It might be personal to the reader. And so where I see this coming of age going on, I think it's intended, because we're looking at a child growing up and gaining powers and all that, but a real allegory to going through puberty, becoming a woman. I don't want to lay that on the author. I just kind of noticed it myself. So anyway, there's your literature lesson for the video. Moving on, the decision is made to let Zithara experience her full powers because the facility they're in is under attack, and she is growing. There's a little reference to the Matrix here. She's gone through some learning. It says, I know Kung Fu. So, I'm sorry, my camera's drifting down. But I think that's a reference to the Matrix. If it's not, it's just a cute coincidence, if you're a Matrix fan. I'm kind of neutral on it. And our story moves on. So they deal with the attack at the facility, and she's finished with her memory and is brought back to the battle against these gigantic monsters, which leaves us with a cliffhanger that comes in the next few pages. So overall, this is an interesting story. It's a good growing up story, and we don't actually in this volume get back to this, what they believe is going to be like the critical battle for their lives. I believe that's going to be in volume 2, after we deal with the cliffhanger left at the end of part 1 here. I do recommend the story just because it is a good read, and when you read it twice, you kind of start noticing some things maybe you didn't notice at first. So, hey, yeah. Number 2 is available right now, and on the campaign to get number right now being, we're at mid-February 2020, but the campaign to get it does have copies of number 1 available. So this was 25 pages of story. In the back they have a little bit of credits and whatnot. There you go. But the interior here is 7 sheets deep, so that's 28 minus 1, 2, and then the title page would be 3. So yeah, we got 25 really solid pages of story. I like the artwork style. There's it's not the right word, dynamicness. Anyway, it's dynamic where it needs to be. There's a lot of wording in here, but it's not too much. It's not overly packed. There was one page that's extremely wordy. Let's see, not this one. I'm not even calling this extremely wordy. This was pretty difficult to arrange for lettering, just this particular frame. But other than that, it flows really well. If I do have to own up to anything negative in here, own up not being, mine, but just acknowledge it. There are, I think, 2 or 3 frames where one narration or speech bubble didn't render at full resolution. It's just a hair off, and yeah, I noticed it. That's me. So if that's the worst thing I can say about this book, that's actually pretty good. So let's see what else we got. If there's just anything else I wanted to mention. This may be, I like how this is done, how the reflections are different between the two. They did that in the Matrix as well, by the way. So 2 references to The Matrix, and it's not even a movie that I'm like a huge fan of. It's just a movie I know about. So I even saw it in the theater, but I just don't care. So anyway, this is neat to see a character develop over time. It's her growing up. She's fighting. What is she fighting for? You get a lot more of her emotional concerns through all these thought balloons. I appreciate that. So hopefully this flip through, just sort of quickly showing off a bunch of the artwork, and we'll just focus a little bit better. Hopefully that'll pique your interest in this story. It's worth having in your library. Thanks a bunch.